start with a gavel this morning since we're starting a little bit late. That'll help us get started. I'm sorry that we're starting a few minutes late, but we'll get right into it. Wish you all a good morning and welcome you all here for the April 23rd meeting of Budget Subcommittee 3. We're going to begin with the vote-only calendar, and as I announced informally before the meeting began, issue number 6 is going to be pulled, and we'll hear that separately. Issue number 15 on vote-only is being pulled, and we'll move that, my understanding is the May 7th meeting, to May 7th. And first we'll establish a quorum.
Bloom.
Here.
Campos. Gordon.
Here.
Logue. Patterson.
Here.
Great. So let's begin with the vote-only calendar. Is there a motion for all items except for 6 and 15?
I would move to approve all items except issue number 6 and issue number 15 on the vote-only calendar.
Okay.
Two.
So let's we'll vote separately on number 2 and number 14. Is that right? 14. And 16. Yes. So 2, 14, and 16 will vote separately. Is there?
Let me. That motion never got a second, so let me amend it. Offer an alternative to approve on the vote-only calendar the following items: issue 1, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 17, and 18.
Great. Thank you for the specificity of that motion. And we'll move to a vote.
Bloom.
Aye.
Campos. Gordon.
Aye.
Logue. Patterson.
I would move on the vote-only calendar issue number 2.
I'll second that. Vote, please.
Bloom.
Aye.
Campos. Gordon.
Aye.
Logue. Patterson. That item's open.
I move on the vote-only calendar issue number 14.
I don't think you want to second that.
Is this a vote yes? Oh, okay.
I'll second that.
All right.
Bloom.
Aye.
Campos. Gordon.
Aye.
Logue. Patterson. That item's open.
And I would, on the vote-only calendar, move issue number 16.
Second.
Bloom.
Aye.
Campos. Gordon.
Aye.
Logue. Patterson. That item's open.
All right, now let's hear issue number 6. Do we need, Mr. Gordon, I think both yourself and Mr. Patterson wanted to be heard on that issue. Do you need a presentation, or did you have a question? Or?
If there's someone here, I don't know, there's someone here from the department.
Oh, no, I only mentioned that we could.
Good morning, members.
Good morning.
I'm Marnie Weber with the Department of Conservation. I'm the Legislative Director for the department.
So my question had to do, I assume that these monies are coming from the high-speed rail bond funds?
That's correct.
This is Sue Montoya with Department of Finance. We'd need to get back to you on the source of the funding on the high-speed rail side.
Yeah, so here's the question, which is that I'm just simply wanted to know the source of the funding. Is it high-speed rail bond? And the proposal here is a 4-year limited term at about $5 million a year, so it's $20 million. I just want to know how that impacted the total amount, if it is bond funds, total amount of bond funds allocated for high-speed rail.
We'll be happy to get back to you with that.
Would you like to hold that open pending response to that question, or?
That'd be my preference.
Okay. Then that certainly would be mine as well. Why don't we hold that open? And thank you very much. And again, issue number 15 is going to be heard on May 7th, and that will take us to our first item to be heard. Natural Resources Department, and Secretary Laird, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And members, it's great to be here. And I know this was postponed, and a lot of things have happened since that happened. So what I wanted to do is, I know you're hearing specifically issues and from the departments, but I wanted to give you an overview of the agency and some of the big issues. And obviously the biggest issue is, ironically, the reason that my appearance was postponed. It's because you were hearing the drought bill the day that I was supposed to come. And the drought is probably the biggest issue right now in front of the agency. It just goes without saying we had 51 consecutive days without rain that broke historic records in Reading and Sacramento. That was in the middle of the rainy season. We've now given just a 5% allocation for water. In January of 2013, CAL FIRE responded to 0 significant fires in California. In January 2014, they responded to 437, including 2 significant fires in Humboldt County, which is generally the wettest place in California during the rainy season. And we have a number of communities that have been in danger of literally having their municipal water systems go dry, and we're working really hard with those communities to keep that from happening. The bill that was passed by the legislature and signed by the governor was of tremendous assistance. It took many things that were in the budget that you would be considering right now and advanced them in the drought bill, not the least of which is roughly $470 million of integrated watershed planning money that really allows projects that are ready to go for recycling and other things across the state to be funded at an earlier time because of that. And so we are members of the Governor's Drought Task Force, and at the same time we've been working hand in hand with other agencies, Department of Food and Ag, and EPA, the State Water Board, to try to do a unified response, not in the traditional silos. And so we've been working very hard on that. That feeds to the fact that in January we adopted as the administration a water action plan. Thank you. And we are working really hard to try to do a project consistent with the dual goals that the legislature gave us in 2009 of ecosystem health and water reliability, a project in the Delta. But a comprehensive water strategy involves many things statewide: water recycling, additional storage, conservation as a way of life, watershed management in the watersheds that lead to the state system, operational efficiencies, different funding schemes, a whole broad array of what we have to do to fit together to a comprehensive strategy at the state. The drought bill gave us first money to implement that water plan, and we as an administration are going to move ahead, because even though we're trying to meet the short-term crisis, I think the public demands a long-term response, and that's really what we want to work to do. Additionally, among the big issues in front of us, we have a Safeguarding California plan. It is the update to the previous governor's 2009 adaptation strategy. How do we look to deal with the changing climate and what its impact will be on California? We issued it in draft, took comments, and we're in the process of responding to those comments and deciding how to finalize the draft. Additionally, given the situation in state parks, a number of foundations stepped forward with assistance. We have a Parks Forward process going on to try to build a sustainable park system. It's had 10, in essence, public hearings or town hall meetings around the state. They've been meeting with different stakeholders. The first draft of their plan will roll out in the next month and continue to move. And while there might be some things that show up this year in that, it is really attuned to trying to be ready for next year's budget and next year's process. Additionally, there are a number of issues we're working on that I mentioned last year and are still very much front and center. We negotiated with Nevada to save the Tahoe Compact, and the first update to the Tahoe Regional Plan in 25 years was adopted. It has survived a court challenge, and we are moving ahead together with Nevada and the Tahoe Agency to implement that plan. Additionally, we're working hard with our federal partners and stakeholders on the Desert Renewable Habitat Conservation Plan in the desert in Southern California. The idea is really to facilitate renewable energy with hand-in-hand durable mitigations so that it doesn't look at it on a project-by-project basis. It is how in the whole region do we work with local government stakeholders, energy companies, people that are concerned about the habitat, and have a regional plan that meets all those goals. We're moving ahead with the federal government step by step. There's a chance that will be finalized in the next 2 years. Normally it takes 15 years to do that. This one has been compressed to between a third and a half of that time because the demand is so pressing and the issues are so present. Additionally, we're moving ahead on implementing the marine protected areas. The tribal negotiations led to an agreement, and the tribes are working hand in hand with the state to implement that and to submit documentation if they've had any historic takes for ceremonial or subsistence purposes. We're moving to try to deal with that in other parts of the state where there might be tribal interests, but it was really the 28 federally recognized tribes in Mendocino, Humboldt, and Del Norte that were the primary ones that were concerned about this and worked with us on it. All the legal challenges have fallen away, and so now we're really trying to figure out how to do enforcement, clear monitoring to know whether it's successful, and adapt, and education, so that around the state you can't board a boat without walking by a sign or a brochure that tells you where the marine protected areas are and tries to implement that. And interestingly, the premier place for that has been Orange County. And I think it's because at a grassroots level they had to organize. They didn't have another infrastructure that supported marine protection. So they were way ahead of the rest of the state and people that wanted to work on education and implementation. And last Friday, the Secretary of Interior, the 2 senators from Oregon, the governor of Oregon, the head of NOAA, all joined in Klamath to sign a new agreement with ranch land irrigators and tribes. I was present on behalf of the governor to deal with the Klamath agreement, and Senator Wyden has indicated that he's going to introduce a bill to implement it. He's hoping to move it out of the Senate this year. It really affects the fish die-off, the massive one that happened in 2001, and to try to keep it from happening again, and at the same time to try to provide enough water to various people along the Klamath in a significant way. And the way I would characterize it, because I think there's 42 stakeholders, some local governments, some tribes, various energy and water producers, state governments on both sides, the federal government, and the idea is that everybody gave something to get something to try to resolve that on a long-term basis. And so we have been a party to that. Then in the budget, we have a few significant overall things. One is the Water Action Plan had a lot of implementation things in the budget. An overwhelming majority of them were moved up to the drought bill so that we could begin work on the Water Action Plan right away. The Department of Fish and Wildlife is really concerned about safeguarding inland waterways, given the increased amount of oil that is going to be moved on trains. There is items in the budget relating to that. The Department of Parks and Recreation has two significant things in the budget. Depending on how you compute it, there's just a significant backlog of deferred maintenance. There is $100 million in the budget to begin to address that deferred maintenance. Additionally, there's an issue with the ongoing general fund support. And just to maintain the same level, there had to be an increase because of past money that is not there. And so that is there to try to bridge us just at the current level in parks until we get the Parks Forward report and try to address long-term issues in the next budget process. And also in cap and trade, which will have its own separate discussion, there's one thing I want to call attention to, and that is there is, in the sustainable communities amount, some indication that some of that can go for farmland preservation. And the Williamson Act has been hanging by a thread the last few years, and I think it would give us the opportunity to assess that situation and decide if there's an appropriate way to either refine it, have something to come in behind it. But that is very important to the administration, the fact that that farmland preservation money is there, and we really would like to work with various stakeholders on that process. With that, that is the Federal Express version of the overview of the Resources Agency, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you. Well, specifically with respect to our issue number 2, the climate change assessment, there are a couple of questions.
I think there's going to be a complete hearing on that. And,
oh, okay.
And we have the Deputy Secretary who's going to be prepared to present and answer questions.
I didn't realize that. I thought you were going straight in.
I'm not running away from it, but it's like I know you're going to. It's better not to have the discussion twice.
Excellent. Well, it appears that there are no specific questions for you, so thank you for the overview.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate the presentation. It's good to see you.
Hello, I'm Ann Shan. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Climate Change and Energy at the Resources Agency. Just wanted to offer a few short remarks. The 3 prior climate change assessments we've had in the state have helped to inform our initial planning and implementation efforts to address climate risk by providing initial information on expected climate impacts in California, our economic exposure due to those impacts, and our adaptation options or our options to prepare for those risks. For instance, we know that a single extreme winter storm event in California may cost on the order of $725 billion, but we have also had a study which indicates that dollars spent in pre-disaster mitigation is basically the equivalent of $4 spent in post-disaster appropriations. So there's a really compelling argument for taking early action. The Safeguarding California Plan, which Secretary Laird discussed briefly, is the state's multi-sectoral plan for preparing for climate risks and covers 9 different sectors across the state. It was developed by a broad group of agencies, state agencies, including CDFA, CDPH, State Water Resources Control Board, OES, Caltrans, Department of Insurance, in addition to the Resources Agency. And that plan catalogs both what we know about risks in those sectors, what has been done to date, and what still needs to be done. One of the things that the Safeguarding California plan did was basically to identify gaps in our state of knowledge regarding vulnerabilities and management options. For instance, we know that temperatures, water availability, and pollinators will all be affected by climate change, but we still need more information about how those changes will affect specific crops and livestock, and how investments in crop switching and relocation can help ensure the resilience of the California agricultural sector, which, as folks know, is over $40 billion annual revenue per year. So I'll stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you. I think you've touched on both of the questions that are posed in the staff report, so thank you for that. Mr. Gordon, Mr. Patterson, no questions, so I'll thank you very much for the presentation. We do have a recommendation to approve this item as budgeted. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Bloom,
Let's vote. Aye.
Campos, Gordon,
Aye.
Logue, Patterson. That item's still open.
We'll hold that open for others to vote. And thank you very much for the presentation. Our next item is Department of Conservation, Air Resources Board, and State Water Resources Control Board. Morning. Morning, everyone. Please
morning.
proceed.
Good morning, Chair, members. I'm Mark Neckenham. I'm the Director of the Department of Conservation. I want to thank the committee for the consideration of our request before you today to appropriate resources to implement Senator Pavley's Senate Bill 4 for oil and gas well stimulation. Excuse me. I also want to thank the staff for an excellent analysis. This is fairly complex stuff, and it is very hard to summarize very quickly, and I appreciate the work that the staff has put into informing you about how this is structured, how the budget works, etc. I also appreciate that while this is a complex issue, it is made a little more complex in a good way by mandating collaboration among the different agencies, and the seating arrangement is no reflection of priority. The Water Board, Air Board, DTSC, and others, we are working very aggressively to ensure that we have covered all of the bases on this. As noted in the committee analysis, the Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources excuse me, is requesting 60 permanent positions and 5 limited term positions. Most of those are geologists and engineers that enable us to do adequate engineering review and to do inspections. We are reaching for a much more aggressive inspection schedule that is putting our engineers in the field and witnessing everything from pressure testing to certification of equipment function. As you know, interim regulations, thank you very much. As you know, interim regulations are in place as of January 1, 2014. They are effective for this year while we are working on our permanent reg package. That reg package is expected to be complete and in place by January 1, 2015. Meanwhile, we are completing an independent science study and a complete statewide EIR on well stimulation. In several areas of the state, we're going into in-depth analysis. So we have an enormous amount of work and productivity going on, and we are happy to report to the legislature and advise any of you individually on our progress. A further note, just so that you understand how the 60 positions are going to be filled, we have actually changed some of the classifications for the engineering positions and the geologist positions so that we are able to reach into a much broader pool of very competent people and professionals. We've also streamlined our HR process. This is a very, very big bump in the number in that division, so we're going to have to hustle to fill all of those positions in a timely manner. So we're confident that if you're able to approve this request, we will continue to produce as aggressively as we have, and of course happy to report all of our steps as we go along. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Welcome.
All right. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Richard Corey, the Executive Officer of the Air Resources Board. And until the recent expansion of fracking in California and the advent of SB4, both ARB and the Air District's efforts related to oil and gas focused on emissions associated with production and post-production activities. The rise in well stimulation has raised the concern about the air quality impacts during pre-production events like fracking. It's also raised concerns regarding toxic air contaminant emissions during the fracking event, and at this time, we have very little air quality data from these operations, and the air emissions associated with well stimulation are essentially unregulated. SB4 addresses this by explicitly requiring monitoring to assess air emissions during well stimulation. ARB has initiated a pilot program, is conducting emissions testing, and with the resources requested, ARB plans to develop and implement a comprehensive air monitoring program that will assess emissions associated with the different types of well stimulation, as well as the different chemicals that may be used. ARB will also conduct air quality modeling and health risk assessments based on the emissions testing and chemical data and make this information available to the public. Finally, given the information available, ARB would develop and adopt suitable regulations, land use guidance, or other actions as appropriate to protect nearby communities. The end goal with these new resources is to have sufficient air quality and health risk data to make sound decisions to develop, implement, and enforce reasonable and protective measures for the residents of California, and to do it through a coordinated and transparent process.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Tom Howard, Executive Director of the State Water Board. As you know, SB4 gives lead responsibility for well stimulation treatment to the Conservation's Division of Oil, Gas, and Geothermal Resources, but it also gives the Water Board a substantial amount of work that it needs to be doing over the next few years. Probably most importantly, it's our job to try to figure out what the impact on groundwater is for well stimulation activities. By July 1, 2015, we're supposed to develop model groundwater monitoring criteria. We review and approve, in some cases, groundwater monitoring plans from well owners. And we're supposed to develop and implement a regional groundwater monitoring program by January 1, 2016. We also have to designate contractors to do individual monitoring that's being requested by parties near well stimulation activities. And lastly, we're going to be consulting with Dogger in development of their regulations. The governor's budget proposes 14 positions and $6.2 million, about $4 million in contract money, the rest for the positions, and then going to $7 million in contract money in the next year. I believe your staff's recommendation is that 3 of those positions should be limited term because their principal focus in the first year is going to be development of these groundwater monitoring criteria. And also that because the $4 million in contract money is principally dedicated towards actual groundwater monitoring, that should be deferred until the groundwater monitoring criteria are developed. My personal perspective is that, I think we should be moving aggressively to try to collect information on this issue as quickly as possible. If we wait to collect information until we have all our plans and criteria developed, it'll be a couple of years before information starts appearing at all. We've been in touch with USGS, and we think that there is some monitoring that we could start sooner, even without fully developed groundwater monitoring plan and criteria. So my recommendation to you would be to approve the request as requested by the administration. Also, the 3 limited-term positions. My opinion in that is that I've been talking with the regional boards, and once we start getting into the oil fields, we seem to find no shortage of things to be doing. So I believe that those positions can be well utilized after they have developed the regulation by working out in the regions to address some of the oil field issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Did LAO want to add some comment? I think we probably have some public comment on this.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members. Brian Brown with the LAO. We did have 3 sets of recommendations related to the 3 departments' SB4 implementation proposals. Your agenda covers them in pretty good detail, so I'll try to cover these quickly. The first is that with respect to Dogger's request, we recommended approval of those. We felt like those were justified on a workload basis. The second is, in a couple areas, we felt like the administration's proposal included some policy elements that we simply suggest that the legislature ensure is consistent with your intent in passing SB4 originally. Two issues there. One is with respect to ARB's proposal. SB4 did have requirements that ARB engage in air quality monitoring activities, but it wasn't very explicit about what those would be. We note that in ARB's budget proposal, they have positions requested to do mitigation and control activity, more enforcement-related activities, it appears. So we think it's simply important that you be comfortable that those additional activities are still consistent with your intent in passing SB4 originally. I would note your agenda identifies having received a letter from Senator Pavley suggesting that, in her view, it is consistent. The other policy issue is how to assess the fee to generate the revenues to cover the cost of these regulatory activities. And the question here is whether to, or the degree to which to apply the fee increase necessary to generate these revenues, whether to apply that to all wells in California or just those that are engaged in hydraulic fracturing or well stimulation activities. And this is really a policy call for you about where you want those costs to be borne. Do you want those costs to be borne more broadly across all drillers in California, or which then spreads that cost and makes it less on any individual driller, or is it your policy preference that that be assigned to those drillers who are actually engaging in the activity driving the regulatory workload? The third issue, set of issues we raised are more technical in nature, and these pertain to the Water Board's proposal, and you heard the Executive Director reference both of these. The first is with respect to the groundwater monitoring contracts. We did recommend not approving the partial year of funding in 14-15 for those contracts, simply to align with the expectations that their regulations will be developed and in place by July 1st, 2015, and therefore, in our view, doesn't make sense to have the contracts in place and be funding those contracts prior to those regulations being in place. And then the second aspect is we did recommend that the Water Board's positions be approved on a limited term basis. This is simply because while we certainly acknowledge that they will have ongoing workload, at this point it's too early to know what that level of workload is going to be. It will depend very much on the regulations and who carries out the different monitoring activities, and therefore we think it's by making them limited term, it provides an opportunity for the department to come back to you in 2 years and justify that they need that same level of resources on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Department of Finance, did you have comments?
Sue Montoya, Department of Finance. We looked at the fee assessment issue and determined that under current law, there is a requirement for a per barrel assessment. And so in our view and in the department's view, a per barrel assessment spread across the 3 regulating entities makes sense. We also were in receipt of the Pavley letter, which your staff has kindly included in the agenda. And we believe that while not explicitly stated in SB4, that there is implicitly an understanding that the Air Board in particular should undertake any regulatory activities authorized under current law to the extent that they find their monitoring does turn up something that could be dangerous to human health.
Thank you. Is there public comment?
Hi, Bill Alio for Environmental Working Group. This is a whole new era for these agencies. It relates to well stimulation, which was basically unregulated up to this point. We fully support Dogger's 6 DPY. They need it to get going. They're doing a good job on getting the regulations in place. And also the CARB. The Water Board is a little more complicated. I have to plead ignorance on the exact details of it. But we were just down in Kern County with 2 members of the Water Board and regional Water Board staff. And they're behind. They know they're behind. So a lot of stuff that's gone on there that they aren't on top of, and now they have new responsibilities. So we would support Mr. Howard's preference that the money be given up front as soon as possible. I'm just ignorant about whether some of that is allocated to regional board staff where they really need it. In Kern County, they have 1.5 PY to do all of their oil and gas work, not just well stimulation. So that's the wastewater disposal, drilling activities, anything related to water quality. So we prefer that this money be given to the agency as soon as possible because SB4 is happening. Well stimulation notices are in, and they're reviewing those for groundwater impacts today and have been criticized for slowing up the process now at this point. So, but there I don't know exactly how that's allocated versus the long-term monitoring plan, which I know is deferred, and plus they're doing new MOUs, which are out of date too, which I know they need the money to start that today. Thank you.
Thank you. So this item is before us, and there is a recommendation from staff to approve the Dogger and ARB request, but to deny the Water Control Board request for the monitoring contracts in the amount of $3.5 million in 2014-15, but approve the request for $7 million for 2015-16, and then to approve the request for 11 permanent and 3 2-year limited term positions. Is there a motion on that?
I'd move the staff recommendation.
I'll second that. Let's vote.
Bloom?
Aye.
Campos? Gordon?
Aye.
Logue? Patterson? It's open.
Thank you very much. And we have the Department of Conservation now. Back. Yes. Welcome again.
Thank you. This item I won't spend a great deal of time on. This is the Alquist-Priolo Act funding for the division, which is the California Geological Survey. I have with me here the state geologist, Dr. John Parrish, and he will be able to give you some detail, or as much detail as you wish, about how the AP Act is funded, how it works within the department, and the effect that those maps have in local planning and their ongoing use. If you would care to have Dr. Parrish give you a rundown of that, I'm happy to have him do so.
Great, thank you. And there is a recommendation to hold this item open. To approve, I'm sorry. Somehow I skipped ahead. My apologies. Please proceed. Don't let me throw you.
Well, the Alquist-Priello Act came into being in 1971, of course, following the Sylmar earthquake. And the reason it took notice then is that the Sylmar earthquake destroyed a number of buildings, about $500 million worth, because those buildings were built astride the surface trace of active faults, and the fault happened to destroy the foundations under all of those buildings. Since that time, we have been charged with putting a zone of mandatory investigation around active faults so that lead agencies, prior to permitting structures within those zones, will do an on-site geological study to pin down the exact trace of where those active traces are. And we have produced so far about 550 maps covering about 5,000 miles of active surface faulting in the state. The issue has come about in that the program is floundering because of a lack of funding, just due to attrition of funding over the years. It was always funded out of a general fund pocket, and as we all know, those funds have been drying up over the last decade or 12 years, and there's no longer any funds available to operate the Alquist-Priello Act. So what we are proposing is that there is already a seismic hazard fee that is imposed on new structures, and simply that the Alquist-Priello Act be funded through that particular fee that exists, and that there be a slight increase in that fee to take care of this. It will amount to about $1.4 million per year, and it will require no new PYs to be added to the staff. We already have the staff on hand that can be diverted to do this project.